Grab your favorite beverage. It's time for the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? This is part one of the Week 11 episode of Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Got 4 teams on bye this week. Packers, Giants, Seahawks, Titans. 2 of the best quarterbacks in the league on bye. We got 5 really good running backs, 4 really good wide receivers. So there's quite a few players to replace here in Week 11. We got 6 AFC home games to get through on this part one episode, starting with the Thursday night game, the Steelers at the Cleveland Browns. I said the Cincinnati Browns. Cincinnati fans out there wouldn't be happy with me. So I'm going to start by looking at the Browns here. So Nick Chubb saw 4 targets, his season average per game, on top of his 20 carries. There were some concerns about Kareem Hunt's impact to Chubb's workload and how these two were going to be able to coexist. And last week, Kareem Hunt stepped right into a 24% target share, caught 7 of his 9 targets for 44 yards. Not bad for your first game back in almost a full year. You look at their snap counts. Chubb played 81%. That's 57 total snaps. And Hunt played 54%, which is 38 total snaps. So they had about 20 snaps where they were both on the field at the same time. They were lining up Kareem Hunt out in the slot. They were, sending him out in pass routes from the backfield. So they're definitely going to use both of them. If you look at Baker's 35 of Baker's 38 passes went to Chubb, Hunt, or Odell and Landry. So this offense it seems like it's going to run through just these 4 guys. Baker said that they needed to funnel targets to OBJ. He did lead the team in targets with 12, but he only caught 5 of them. And now this is the 3rd game in a row that Landry has given us more fantasy points than Odell. So I think this offense is still trying to figure out what they're going to be. Bringing on a second Pro Bowl running back and having 2 Pro Bowl wide receivers and an offensive line that's been struggling. I think it's going to take some time for this offense to really realize what their potential is and for Freddie Kitchens to really figure out how he's going to get all 4 of these guys involved. And it seems like this is a pretty good blueprint. It's a tough matchup for Baker and both of the wide receivers and Kareem Hunt, really, if he's going to be this essential 3rd receiver. The Steelers, they allow the 7th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, the 5th fewest to wide receivers, and the 6th and the 8th fewest receptions and receiving yards allowed to running backs. So it seems like Nick Chubb probably is the safest play for the Browns this week, especially with this whole home running back on Thursday night. So I actually went back and I looked at every Thursday night game and the home running backs. And besides the Green Bay Packers in Week 1, so first of all, the Packers played 4 Thursday night games in the first month of the season, which seems extremely unfair to me. But whatever. They're what are they, 8-2 or 7-3, whatever they are. They seem to be doing just fine. So, but yeah, if you exclude that first week where Aaron Jones only had 4.5 points and Jamal Williams only had 2.5 points. There's 12. The home running backs on Thursday nights have averaged 16.5 fantasy points, and this is in a half-point PPR league. So that's 12 running backs in 9 Thursday night games. That's including Phillip Lindsay's 3.7 point game versus the Chiefs where they were getting blown out. One of the 3 games that I counted both that was one of the games. There's 3 games that I counted both running backs into this. The second one was the other Packers game in Week 4. Aaron Jones had almost 15 fantasy points. Jamal Williams had almost 10 fantasy points. And then in Week 6, when the Patriots guys, Sonny Michel had 12.3 and James White had 9. So there's definitely a trend to it. And, I mean, the big guys, Christian McCaffrey, Chris Carson, Dalvin Cook, all three of them had huge games, especially Christian McCaffrey going back to Week 2 when he had almost 40 fantasy points. And then Kenyon Drake, just 2 weeks ago on Week 9, he had just been traded to the Cardinals like 2 or 3 days beforehand, and he came in and he put up 26.2 fantasy points, again, in a half-point PPR league. So there's definitely something to this home running backs on Thursday night. So Nick Chubb is definitely going to be somebody that I'm looking at for FanDuel this week, and I think Kareem Hunt too. The fresh legs. He came right in, like I said, 24% target share. That's not bad at all. So I like both of these running backs. Looking at the Steelers, so the first thing that jumps out, the best matchup in this game is the tight ends for the Steelers. The Browns are allowing the third most fantasy points to tight ends, so Vance McDonald is solid play this week. McDonald with 7 targets last week. Mason Rudolph has shown that he loves to just dump the ball off quick, and why not use your tight ends to do that? So this is back-to-back weeks now that James Washington has outscored Juju. In the 7 games since Big Ben went down, Juju has had 4 games with under 6 fantasy points, again, half-point PPR, and only 1 game this year with over 100 receiving yards, and it was versus Miami, who's one of the worst defenses in the league, if not the worst. Kind of like Keenan Allen, I don't know how you sit him, but it's definitely a conversation you gotta have with yourself when you're starting when you're setting your roster. I got Juju in 2 of my leagues, and I've been able to get away from him in 1 of them, but the other one, my backups, it's a 12-team league. It's just Juju's my best, and it's a full-point PPR, so got to kind of keep him in there for that. But, he's fallen first from wide receiver 1 territory, which is what we drafted him to be, into this wide receiver 2 because of his quarterback situation, and now he's kind of in the flex conversation because he really has not been playing all that well. Looking at Jalen Samuels, he kind of might have blown his shot at taking serious touches away from James Conner. Apparently Conner's on track to play this week on Thursday night. In the 2 games with no James Conner, Jalen Samuels has averaged 1.7 yards per carry on his 22 carries, which is not very good. He hasn't been all that efficient in the passing game either. Only 4 yards per target on his 20 targets. 20 targets in 2 games. There's that one where he had 13. He caught all 13 of them, which is great in the PPRs, but you kind of want to see him give you a little bit more on the yardage. He's still going to be involved in the pass game. Maybe we see the Steelers limit James Conner's touches a little bit by giving the passing work to Jalen Samuels and the rushing work to Conner, kind of like what we saw last week with the Browns and Chubb and Hunt. So I think you can play if James Conner plays. I think you can play both of them, and if he misses again, then Jalen Samuels is obviously another rock solid RB right there. So that is the Steelers at the Browns. Nice little AFC North matchup. We got another division game here: the Bills and the Dolphins. So the Bills' offense is kind of frustrating to watch. I got Josh Allen in one of my leagues, where I waited way too long at quarterback on draft day. But it seems like they get into a rhythm with the short passing game. Devin Singletary has not looked bad when they've given him the ball, 5.3 yards per carry so far, or at least last week. And then they just take all these deep shots with John Brown and Isaiah McKenzie. But I don't know. It seems like they're taking the deep shots just to take them. John Brown's a great deep wide receiver, but I feel like they could use a little bit more consistency. Give the ball to Devin Singletary a little bit more. He's played great. But I was kind of surprised going into Week 10, the Browns were allowing the 9th most fantasy points to running backs, and yet the Bills only gave Singletary 8 carries. They did target him 7 times, but unfortunately he was only able to give us 8 yards on those 7 targets, which is not good. You kind of need a little bit more from him in that part of the offense if he's only going to get 8 carries. But yeah, I'm really hoping to see they kind of just give the ball to Devin Singletary and let him do what he did 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, whenever it was, when they had let him touch the ball like 20-something times. A lot has been made about John Brown's consistency. 7.5 points is his lowest output so far this year. No games with less than 50 receiving yards, 5 of 9 games with double-digit fantasy points, which is great. But I think there's another consistent wide receiver emerging in Buffalo, and that's Cole Beasley. He's not going to get you any crazy, huge 20, 30-point game, but 7 of 9 games now with between 8 and 11.5 fantasy points. Getting towards the end of the season here where you're looking at your roster, I feel like you kind of have to take a couple shots with your bench players, maybe go after guys that have a lot of upside and are just consistent. You don't want those up and down guys. So in a league where 12 teams, especially in PPR leagues, I think he should be owned. I think he should be at the end of your bench because, like I said, he's been pretty consistent now. Looking at the Dolphins, the only guy I would have said considers maybe starting is Mike Gesicki, but he did not play well last week. And it was a good matchup, and he only caught half of his targets. Looking at FanDuel on this game, the over-under's at 41, which I was considering taking, but then I was looking at the home team over-under, which is set at 17. The Dolphins have only scored over 16 points twice this year. Once was against the Jets in Week 9, which we all know is a horrible defense, and against the Bills in Week 7, but that was with Kenyon Drake, that was with Preston Williams, that was with Mark Walton. All these guys will not be there this week. And this Bills defense is pretty good, so I think I might consider throwing that Dolphins under 17 on the end of my parlay ticket this week. So that's another AFC division game, AFC East there. Let's go to another AFC division game. The Jacksonville Jaguars at the Indianapolis Colts. The Jags coming off of a bye. We'll see Nick Foles retake the QB spot, and he's got a good matchup. The Colts allow the 7th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. These 3 Jaguars wide receivers also have a great matchup. The Colts are also allowing the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So DJ Shark, D.D. Westbrook, if he's healthy, if he plays. If not, Chris Conley for sure. I think Nick Foles is going to come out and distribute the ball really well. I don't know if he's going to really have a favorite target. So we'll see how it shapes up. See who kind of takes over if anyone takes over the number 1 role there, as far as number 1 wide receiver in Jacksonville goes. But the Colts also allow the 2nd most receptions to running backs and the 5th most fantasy points overall to running backs. So you got to figure Leonard Fournette coming off of a bye, he should see a lot of touches in this game. They want to be able to ease Nick Foles back into the works here. So I think Fournette's going to see 25, 30 touches easy. On the Colts side, not sure if Hoyer's going to start again, but he kind of killed the Colts' chances last week. He had 3 interceptions. He completed less than 50% of his passes. They tried forcing the ball to Eric Ebron with 12 targets. He only caught 5 of them. 2 of the 3 interceptions came while targeting Eric Ebron. They didn't really look all that great, man. Jack Doyle with another touchdown, kind of the bright spot of this Colts offense last week. And that's now his 3rd touchdown on the season. All 3 of his touchdowns came in games when T.Y. Hilton was not active, and it looks like T.Y. is going to miss again. So in this game, I think you can throw out Jack Doyle and Eric Ebron too if he's going to keep getting 12 targets. I know apparently Ebron had went to the coaching staff during their bye week and said, hey, you guys got to use me better, of course. So I think those 2 tight ends are definitely worth playing. With all these the injury at wide receiver for the Colts and the backup wideout's not really doing all that much either. All right, Next is the Chiefs at the Chargers, which is the last of the division games so far, or this week. With Sean McCoy a healthy scratch, Damian Williams seems to have taken control of the RB touches. 19 of the 22 running back carries and 5 of the 7 running back targets went to Damian Williams. 4 yards per carry, not good, but not bad. Then over 6 yards per catch, which is also not good, but not bad. The telling thing to me was that 15 of his 24 touches came after the second quarter fumble that he had, which was returned for a touchdown. So looks like he has kind of taken over there. He's maybe stepping into the role that we were all drafting him to have. He was probably drafted in the 3rd, 4th round in a lot of leagues, even after LaShawn McCoy was acquired. But Tyreek Hill career high in targets with 19 last week. Sammy Watkins with a 9-target day, but only was able to give us 40 yards on 5 catches. With a 23% target share in this ridiculous offense, and I don't know how you can get away from Watkins as a flex play unless you have a lot better options. But he's just kind of boom or bust, and the boom in this offense is definitely worth playing in for sure. And then, like I said, Mahomes, Damian Williams, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, obviously these are all must starts. The questions are Watkins and Hardman. Hardman only 1 target last week, but it was a 63-yard touchdown catch, so he's another guy, total boom or bust. But again, in this offense, I think it's a boom that might be worth playing. If you're looking at other wide receivers on your team, like Tyler Boyd or somebody like that. On the Chargers side, Keenan Allen, 8 catches on 11 targets for 68 yards. It's his best game since his huge 37-point game in Week 3. 2 of Rivers' 3 interceptions were on passes that Keenan Allen was targeted. The connection between these two is simply just not there anymore. The offense is definitely changing towards more of a run-centric offense. Mike Williams has become a complete boomer bust, touchdown-dependent wide receiver like Deshaun Jackson. He's just not getting the red zone targets that he was getting last year that made him so much more valuable with Hunter Henry healthy. And I think the running backs and Hunter Henry are really the only reliable fantasy options, with Keenan Allen still maybe a PPR option, but he's no longer a must-start every week. It's just not there, man. It's not there. The Chargers ran the ball 38 times in Week 9 and 30 times in Week 10. And with Rivers' 3 interceptions, I bet the coaching staff is looking back and saying we still didn't run the ball enough. The Chiefs' run D had been playing pretty well in Weeks 7 through 9 after allowing on average. In those 3 weeks, 7, 8, 9, they averaged under 100 rush yards a game, and that was against Minnesota, Green Bay, and Denver. 3 teams with good running games. But then last week, they got shredded like they had in the first 6 weeks of the season. Derrick Henry with 188 rush yards and 2 touchdowns on 23 carries. So I think the Chargers look at that game and they go, yeah, we need to do that. We need to do what we did to the Packers in Week 9 and just run the ball down their throat. I think they're starting to realize that maybe Rivers is slipping a little bit. All right, we got the Bengals at the Raiders. This is a tough game for the Bengals. Lost 49-13 to the Ravens, who we'll get to in our next game. But after going down 18 points at the half, I think the Bengals wanted to take the loss and just protect their young quarterback. Mixon had 17 of his career high 30 carries in this game, which was strange to see. 17 of those 30 carries were in the second half, which was strange to see in a huge blowout. In this matchup, I think maybe Tyler Boyd might be the only guy that's somewhat safe to play in this passing game, unless you want to consider Mixon in the passing game, which I think he's also kind of reliable with this new quarterback. He's got a decent matchup this week. The Raiders are allowing the 4th most receptions and the 7th most receiving yards to running backs. I expect the head coach Zach Taylor to get Mixon involved in the passing game, kind of like we just saw last week with the Buccaneers giving 8 targets to Ronald Jones after only targeting him, I think it was 7 times all season. So I think offensive-minded guys are going to look at they figure out what your weakness is on defense and they attack it. So I expect to see Mixon get targeted quite a lot in this game, especially if Giovanni Bernard is going to be missing time because apparently he's got a knee sprain or something like that. Looking at the Raiders, Hunter Renfrow has become more and more involved in this offense. This was 2 games in a row now that the Raiders have went to this no-huddle, hurry-up offense where they focused on Jalen Richard and Hunter Renfrow late in the game. The drive was finished off by Josh Jacobs, who had another solid 100 total yard game. But yeah, I mean, I think Darren Waller is still a must start in PPR leagues because of Derek Carr's love to dump the ball off to his tight ends and the target share that we saw him have throughout the majority of the season. And despite the last 2 games that he had, which weren't all that great, I think he's definitely still worth playing. This should be another, should be a lot of points scored on this Bengals defense, which did not look all that great last week against the Ravens. But then again, who does look good against the Ravens on defense? All right, speaking of the Ravens, this is, I think, going to be the most fun game of the week. Texans at the Ravens. I'll start with the Texans side here, actually. So Carlos Hyde, he's been good in the games that he's had over 18 carries. He's averaged 12 fantasy points a game in the 5 games in which he's had over 18 carries, and then only 7.2 fantasy points a game in the 4 games where he had less than 18 carries. The problem is that there's only been 2 teams so far this year that have been able to run the ball over 18 times against the Ravens. That was the Browns with Nick Chubb, 20 attempts in Week 4, and Chris Carson with the Seahawks in Week 7 with 21 attempts. So if they can get the ball enough to Carlos Hyde, I think he won't be a bad play. And like I said, with 5 running backs on bye, you might have to start him this week in your flex spot or in an RB2 spot. And Baltimore's secondary has not played well. They are allowing right now the most fantasy points to wide receivers, and the second most to quarterbacks and tight ends. So I expect the Texans really to put up some points on offense with their passing game and not so much with their running game. Will Fuller might be returning from his hamstring injury, but I'm not going to play him. I'm going to sit him and wait to see how healthy he really is. Excuse me. You never know with these hamstring injuries, that one little tweak and he's done for the game. So it's too much of a risk for me. And yes, the Ravens are tough on running backs. Allowing the second fewest fantasy points to the position overall, but they are a little vulnerable to pass-catching running backs. They allow the 4th most receptions to running backs. So Duke Johnson, who's had 5 targets in each of his last 3 games, has played pretty well in the past few games. It's not a horrible play this week. Again, like I said, with 5 good running backs on bye this week, might have to play him as well. But I really think this is going to be a fun game. Looking at the Ravens side here, so they scored 49 points. And Lamar Jackson only attempted 17 passes. They only ran the ball 23 times. So on 40 plays, they scored 49 points, which is pretty ridiculous. RG3 did come in. He went 5 for 5 with 20 yards. He also caught a couple laterals. They ran a couple option plays with Jackson and RG3. This offense is just a lot of fun to watch, man. If you haven't watched any Ravens games so far this year, I don't know what you've been watching, but definitely tune into this one for sure. Lamar Jackson is just straight up carrying me in 4 of the leagues that I have him. No surprise, I'm 8-2 in both of my standard leagues that he's my quarterback, so that's no PPR. And then in 2 of my half PPR leagues, I'm 6-4, and I'm 5-5 in one of them that I've kind of been beat up and with injuries at running back. He's averaged 78 rushing yards a game with 6 rushing touchdowns so far. In 7 of his 9 starts this year, he's had at least 60 rushes. One of the 2 that he didn't was week 1, where he threw 324 yards and 5 touchdowns. Didn't really need to run that week. And in week 3 against Kansas City, which actually they did a pretty good job of kind of containing him. But he's been a monster, man. So he's just so much fun to watch. He's giving so much value to especially these tight ends, which we'll get into. But first I want to look at Marquise Brown. He caught his 4th touchdown of the season last week. The first play of the game for the Ravens was a 50-yard bomb where Jackson and Brown connected. And then he scored on this nice little corner route in the middle of the field on the 3rd quarter. He is definitely developing, and rookie wide receivers definitely take the most time to develop out of all the skill position positions. So I think he's going to be a good start this week against the Texans, who are allowing the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers. They're 17th in explosive pass plays allowed, so that's pass plays of 20 yards or more, which is 17th, right in the middle of the pack. And they did face Kansas City, so it's not like they haven't faced any good explosive offenses, but I don't know. I think this game is going to be a complete shootout. I didn't look at what the over-under is for this one, but I might take the over for sure. All right, so that's going to do it for the AFC home games. This part 1 episode. Make sure you tune in for part 2, where we go through the 8 NFC home games. And as always, may the fantasy gods be cool to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. For more episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Beers and Bruisers is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach TV, or your favorite podcast service. Beers and Bruisers is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gaming operates a national problem gambling helpline network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to drink responsibly and always look for your man downfield.